Welcome out to another episode of It's All Been Trucked Before. This time, the chase. The chase on It's All Been Trucked Before. Hey, you don't have to chase us. We're easy to find. On Facebook, It's All Been Trucked Before. Come on out there, follow us, like us, subscribe. You know what? You can also do that on YouTube. Maybe you listen to us there, depending on where you listen to us. You know what? Wherever you listen to us, like, subscribe, comment, please. All over the internet, wherever you get your podcast. And that way, there will not be the chase. But this is the chase on It's All Been Trucked Before.
Welcome out to another episode of It's All Been Trucked Before. Some of your regular hosts are here.
This is Steven.
Jimmy-Jerome, and we are down Keith because we sabotaged his engines and left him behind, and he's chasing us to try to catch up.
That's very appropriate.
He did say start without him, and he should be here at some point. Don't know if it'll be this week or next week. We'll let you know as soon as we know. But for now, we're going to talk about the chase, and then we'll fold him in whenever he shows up. So, Steven, first impressions on the chase.
It was adequate. It was weird because it had these big, highfalutin, I guess, far-reaching conversations or concepts, whatever. But I liked aspects of the episode as a whole. I think this one might have been less than the sum of its parts because I enjoyed the Galen and that whole interaction at the beginning, and then there was a mystery to solve. The mystery wasn't great, though. And we had the whole rogues gallery of Cardassians and Klingons and Romulans and oh my and all that stuff. So there were a lot of aspects I enjoyed about it, but overall, it was all right, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, obviously has lasting implications for the franchise. Yeah. And it solves, basically explains in canon why so many of the aliens look similar, explaining away their budget limitations, which I appreciate that. I agree that the tension probably wasn't there the way it needed to be. The chase didn't feel high stakes the way it should have been.
Yeah.
But this is a very highly regarded episode, a very highly reviewed episode, which is interesting. And I try to take it apart from modern sensibilities. Right. And I think maybe I probably would have liked it a little more in the 90s when it aired.
Yeah, probably. I guess back then I mean even if I'd been through almost 6 full seasons of TNG, maybe I would react more to like, oh my God, everyone's here. The whole gang's here. But
it's very interesting to me the races they chose to include though. The humans, Klingons, Romulans, Cardassians, not Vulcans. Although we should assume if Romulans are involved because they're an offshoot of the Vulcan race, that counts. Sure. But the Federation was founded by Vulcans, Andorians, Tellarites, and humans. Right. And we only have one of those 4 races represented. Right. I feel like there should have been more than 4. And what I think bothered me the most, and we'll get into the details here in a second, but the coincidence of them all finding out about this puzzle at the same time and all arriving at the same time felt forced to me.
Yes.
Whereas this kind of could have been a cool, like, low-key burn over a season or 2 with just little hints here and there. But, yeah, anyway. We begin, they're investigating a stellar nursery, and there are protostars, which tickled me because I've been watching Star Trek Prodigy. As we record this, Prodigy just returned for its second half of the first season. Yeah. And, their ship is the protostar. That has a protostar as an engine. Yeah. Somebody was a fan of this episode.
I had that. It gave me 2 thoughts of that thing, and they actually end up kind of touching on it later. One was, and maybe we've talked about this before, but like Kirk's captain's log versus Picard's. He actually sounds like he's filling out his diary, and this is a secret that he knows, and maybe some other people will get it. And then Picard's feel very, I'm announcing to you that this is what is happening. And I'm bringing you up to date, and both are fine. It just dawned on me because we've talked about how essentially it's exposition, but I think Picard's are more effective as exposition or more direct. Maybe I always felt like Kirk was just kind of like I'll get around to what I'm talking about here, but maybe I'm just misremembering. The other part of that, and they get into it later, is when Galen kind of gives Picard a hard time when he won't join him, and he's like, "Well, what are you doing right now? You're mapping a nebula, big deal, which goes back to the man trap. Right at the beginning when I always made fun of them. The starship was dropping by to give a doctor a physical, and a research crew physicals, which it makes sense. It's the thing that has to be done. Starships have to get there. But anyway, so that was my very, very, very first impression of the very beginning of the episode.
I mean, in terms of your captain's log note, I would say that there's a very simple explanation that would fit in the canon that in Kirk's time, there were 13 Constitution-class starships that explored the galaxy. Everything was still new, and the procedures probably weren't as refined. And who knew what they were going to do with captain's logs at that point? So, of course, he just does what he thinks is right. Whereas by Picard's time, he studied Kirk's logs. Everybody studied those early logs. He knows people are going to look at them and be studying them as an official report. So I think that would definitely change the approach of recording a captain's log.
That makes sense.
I don't think that's ever said explicitly in canon, but I feel like I don't feel like that's twisting us very much to explain it. It makes a lot of sense based on scenarios. Yeah. So at the beginning of this episode, Riker and Professor Galen, who you referenced, played by Norman Lloyd, best known for Dead Poets Society, Saboteur, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, The Age of Innocence. He's a producer. He has 40 credits as a producer, 68 credits as an actor.
He worked with Orson Welles in Orson Welles' early days, and I know him best from St. Elsewhere. That's where I was first introduced to him. But.
Yeah, and and he's got 23 credits as a director, so he's really been around. But this is his only Trek credit.
Yeah.
But he and Riker hiding in the dark, very creepy. And I get it's a surprise for Picard, but it still seems so creepy when he walks in there.
It was very weird. I mean, I'm glad they were able to work up some lighting so that it was only on the relic or whatever. But
yeah. He says Picard's a star pupil. I feel like this definitely helps fill in the backstory that Picard studied archaeology and knows a lot about it. We know that he likes archaeology, but this helps round out that part of him.
More than a hobby to him. But this,
it could have very easily been his career, but he chose to explore the galaxy in a different way.
Yes.
I mean, the way they phrased it, starship captain and archaeologist don't seem all that far off of one another.
Right. Yeah, it's different. As you said, it's different forms of exploration.
Not a comparison I would have made naturally, I don't think.
No. And is it he and Crusher that have that specific conversation where, she's like, well, you chose to explore the galaxy a different way. I think the words you used, and
I enjoyed all the Crusher for a minute.
Yeah.
I like that confidence in his decision. Like, it's so easy to have a character look back at the path not taken and have some regrets and wonderings and musings. And I liked the decision here that, no, I made the right decision. I just feel bad because it hurt him. Right.
Yeah. And, he still gives some thought to, what could have been or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, exactly. He's like, but no, this is, I wrote down the married to his ship, and he doesn't say that, but he's just like, this is what I do and this is what I'm going to do. That just can't happen.
I mean, he was already captain of the Stargazer. Then he gets given the flagship of the fleet, the Enterprise D. If you're regretting that career decision, you might be in the wrong field, right? He's very accomplished as a starship captain. Yeah. I did think it was interesting, too, because the other thing we know he's good at is diplomacy. And he is so blowing off diplomacy. Like, I don't care about that. I'm concerned on this archaeology.
He does say, I think this is when he's talking to Beverly, the past is an insistent voice inside my head, which I love that. I think it's a great line. I think for a lot of people, the past is an insistent voice in their head, what could have been or what if I'd done things differently or whatever, different timelines or alternate universes that are out there. Is Galen really surprised that Picard's not going to go do this?
He is, and I don't know. So I'm trying to wrap my head about why he's surprised. And what I've come to the conclusion is Galen, despite knowing Picard and knowing that he passed up to go, I think something in Galen thinks Picard probably regretted it because Galen's devoted his life to it, so he can't imagine that somebody else is not interested. And because the thing that Galen's bringing him is so huge and earth-shattering, Galen's like, well, this is something you can't pass up. And he's so passionate about it that to him, he just can't see how somebody else isn't.
Well, and I can't remember if it's mentioned in the episode, or maybe I read this. I think it's in that he considered himself. It was kind of a father-son kind of a thing. Yeah. So when that was mentioned, I was like, okay, that actually makes more sense too. Why he was so hurt or disappointed and everything. So.
Well, Picard talking about Galen as the father that actually understood him, as opposed to his regular father, Galen's sons didn't understand him, so we connected. That really spoke to me because I don't connect that well with my father. I love and value him now, but growing up I didn't get along with him. It's because we didn't have that connection, and I could totally see that, like locking in with somebody else that actually understands your interests and finding a different type of mentor there. Yeah. They did say, though, it would have been 30 years since they've seen each other. And if they were really that close, I guess Galen must have been really upset. That's the only thing I could think of, because otherwise, why wouldn't Picard keep in touch and still talk about archaeology?
Right. Because,
so Galen was probably pretty hurt.
Yeah. Galen says he was in the neighborhood last summer. What does that mean in the middle of space? When's last summer?
Well, it depends what planet you're talking about.
Right.
Last summer was just yesterday for this one planet.
Yeah. So and then I just thought, well, maybe he said that kind of in a joking way. Well, I was in the neighborhood, and he just continued to joke of using another colloquialism or whatever. So.
I was fascinated by this species they're talking about. I want to say they call them the Kurlans or something, that died out millennia ago outside of Federation space. And that ends up being the race that we're following. But now I kind of, all these Star Trek spinoffs, I kind of want one about them, but I don't think it would be all that interesting. Like, it would work out as a special, I guess. Yeah. But the first species out there when no other races are there to find them.
Well, and they say they died out, right? But they don't really say how or why or any of that.
I don't find that important to the story.
Yeah.
But I do think, we talk about from a scientific perspective that there's no way we can be alone in the universe because there's all these planets, all these possibilities. Right. And I've often wondered, like, is it possible that we're really the first species to get out in space, or we're barely in space, but if we actually start exploring the stars, is it possible that we're the first ones out there and there's nobody else? Or is it more likely that, like in Star Trek, there's other species out exploring, we start running into each other? Mm-hmm. And I just don't know. I think it's super egocentric to think that you're going to be the first one out, and it's more likely to be the Star Trek model. But this takes that story and says, yeah, this race was the first one out, didn't find anybody, got lonely, died off. I just think that's interesting commentary, because I'm sure there's plenty of human scientists that have argued we're probably first.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I wrote down, when they finally revealed we kind of drop stuff off everywhere or whatever, the DNA, that's essentially the cherry to the gods. I think I've talked about this before, the 70s schlock science, I'll say schlock science book, but it was, this time of UFOs and all that stuff were hot. But that was essentially their theory, was that, we've been visited before, and that's why certain things are certain things here, and that's how the Egyptians built the pyramids, and I'm like, oh, that's I can't even think of the name of that show. But also, Who Mourns for Adonis touches on it as well. That they were actual gods, and then they visited the planet. So, but I think probably by this point, most people had forgotten that Adonis kind of dropped that in. It was also a very mediocre episode of the original series. So it canon, sure, but probably. The gods weren't curls or whatever these guys were. So maybe they were a different. Well, obviously there's a lot of different omnipotent races out there.
There are. If Galen really wanted, I don't know. It strikes me as odd that his work is so secretive. Like, if he's trying to get funding, if he's trying to get support to go visit these planets, you'd think he'd make it public. I mean,
right.
Especially the Klingons, the Cardassians, the Romulans, their governments have seen fit to put their top fleet people on this. And I feel like if Galen, I really want Picard to call Starfleet Command and be like, hey, Galen wants me to do this thing. This is important. We should do it. Instead of just like, no, go off. I think he did understand the full importance at that point. But the fact that Galen's trying to keep out, and maybe Galen just doesn't trust Starfleet, you could explain that away in different ways, but it just seemed like this shouldn't have been so secret.
Yeah, it seemed like just a way to keep it secret for us, the audience, and then of course he dies, and then it's like, well...
Again, it's so secret, Picard and Starfleet haven't heard of it, but the Romulans, Klingons, and Cardassians have, because they're all following his work. Right. Or part of it is following his work.
Yeah, and maybe there's more to that, but maybe he was shopping himself around or whatever, but... That I think that might be more interesting, but at one point they're scanning because they were hitting a lot of planets.
Yeah,
Data's scanning, and I think Picard says scan for earthworks. I'm like, this is just more of those arbitrary sensors. I'm like, how do you scan for earthworks?
You look for burial mounds. You look for Stonehenges. Turn on your Stonehenge sensor setting. No, that is really funny. I didn't catch that. That's good.
So again, I understand you got to do some exposition there, but it's like, wait, I will never understand how these sensors work, or don't work, as tends to be the case.
So Galen, to entice Picard, gives him this present of this really important archaeological find that's super rare and super valuable. And my mind just thinks it belongs in a museum.
Right.
I mean, that's my alternate episode. I want to see Indiana Picard actually putting on the leather jacket and the whip and doing I think that would have been a more exciting, fun adventure. But yeah, it strikes me of just how valuable this is. And I guess, again, he's trying to entice Picard. He really thinks he's going to have Picard's help.
Right.
And I get why he wants the help, because he's not sure he can complete it on his own. And this guarantees it'll get done. But still, that's a huge gift to give away.
Yeah. And my alternate episode is pretty much the same. It's that Picard actually leaves the Enterprise. And I envisioned a similar thing, like more daring do. Of course, he's running into Vash all over the galaxy.
Yep.
That would be fun.
He could travel with Bosch.
Yeah.
And in a recent episode of Star Trek Lower Decks, and I know this will have aired a long time ago when we get to this, there's that archeological character that's got her own ship, and she's being funded by Picard to do archaeological work.
Right.
So we know in his retirement, well, actually, I'm not sure he's retired at the time of Lower Decks. Not sure how that timeline lines up. Because he's retired decades by Star Trek Picard, but Lower Decks only a few years after the end of DS9 and stuff, so I'm not sure. I don't think he's retired yet. But still, he's funding archaeology and following up on this stuff.
I didn't read. Is there a reason that Vash wasn't that character on Lower Decks? Because in my mind, I'm like, it's a Vash-like character. But then...
I guess I just assumed you wanted somebody young and hip for Mariner to relate to, and Vash is older. But
I guess that makes sense.
But I would have loved a Vash return.
Right.
Come on, yeah. I can't see Vash working a recruitment table at a job fair, though.
That's true. That's true.
Especially after traveling with a Q.
Yeah.
I appreciated getting a glimpse of Picard and Crusher breakfasts. It's nice to know those are continuing and they have that relationship. I
did too. I love the way I wrote down the way Crusher just slinks in and is like, good morning, and just starts pouring her coffee and all that. And I like it. You know, I always say, like, well, how do they know when it's morning? And, you know, we've talked about it. It's like, well, you know, they have some kind of clock, you know.
They do. They have a clock on the ship.
Yeah. But it very much conveyed that it was morning. I mean, her hair wasn't bedhead, but it wasn't as perfect as it usually is. It was still, Gates McFadden's hair is amazing. But yeah, and the way she carried herself was like, yeah, this is morning, and this is what they do. She's not into her day yet. She's settling into her day. So yeah, I dare very much. I enjoyed all of their conversation. I mean, I usually do, but especially in this episode, I thought it really showed what a good sounding board she is for him. And,
it just makes me sad that when Star Trek Picard came back, they weren't just together.
Yeah.
And I do like in season 2 the love interest he has. But now I'm divided in season 3 if I want him to get back with Crusher or with this new love interest, or neither. I don't know, but we got a third season coming up, and I think Picard and Beverly have some unfinished business that I do have faith they'll actually address in Picard in a way that we don't get addressed in the films. The films don't even really touch it, barely touch it, and that's disappointing to me because I wanted to see that go somewhere.
Yeah. Whereas
the films do touch the Riker-Troy relationship and develop it. So it's not like everybody has to stay in stasis and they can't follow up on relationships. We had a distress signal. Galen's ship mysteriously blows up and he dies. Well, not just his ship mysteriously blows up. The Illyrians or whatever mysteriously blow up.
Never explained why it blew up.
I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, that Galen wasn't really dead. They'd secretly kidnapped him and all that. And I was really disappointed that nothing ever came of it.
Yeah, because Riker's like, Worf. And he's like, hey, man, I didn't do anything. What are you talking about? I just did the usual phaser and it just completely blew up. Like,
I feel like at this point, Riker should not immediately accuse Worf. I think he should be like, Worf, hey, what's going on? I know you didn't do that on purpose. Can you explain what happened?
Yeah.
Riker's just so trigger happy in a certain way, not in necessarily a terrible way, but he's just man of action, and he doesn't necessarily take that beat sometimes.
Right. Yeah, and there he did not at all. And then, but I mean, I was curious as well, but then we never even get an answer, which I guess is okay, but it would have been. I was looking for it.
Troy approaches Picard and asks him to take a walk in the Arboretum.
Yeah.
I really appreciated that because I think we got just the briefest of hints that she kind of helped him through the whole Locutus thing. And so they have a relationship, a counseling relationship, where she's his friend, but also mental health. To the point I really kind of got mad at him for them biting her head off when she came back to him later. And he was just like, no, stop questioning me. This conference isn't as important as this other thing.
Yeah.
And she's like, they scheduled it 6 months ago. They're really counting on you. No, it's not important. And he ended up being right. But I wanted him to have that conversation and not just bite her head off.
Yeah.
And especially seeing that they have that relationship that she's like, let's take a walk. And he's like, okay, fine. And then the next scene, it doesn't gel to me. Yeah. I liked the take a walk scene. I didn't like his reaction to her in the second scene.
Yeah, it looked like they were trying to, because I think even Riker gets into it with him about, all the places they're going. And I think it was just to further show that, how passionate, and, whether or not Picard was being distracted or blinded because it was his mentor and all that stuff. But that was just a thin read to me. I didn't think that had to be explored. So so I agree with you. Yeah.
Whoever I can't remember if it was the Klingons or Cardassians that destroyed that whole planet's ecosystem just to hide the puzzle piece.
Yeah.
Woo, that's some serious villainy that we need to get into further. Yeah. That's not something we just move past and keep working with them on.
Yeah, my favorite Star Trek Tumblr, Fashion So, said the same thing. They're like, hey, and you might have missed this, but yeah, these guys just try to show an entire, like, we don't see it, but oh my God, yeah.
I get there was no sentient life. I still don't find that excusable.
Right.
It was rough.
Yeah. And then when that Klingon shows up, he's kind of, I wrote down he was Captain Caveman Klingon, because he was kind of like, he felt like comic relief Klingon instead of a Klingon, which, whatever, I'm happy to have a comic relief Klingon, but he didn't seem like, what do I know? He didn't seem like the type to just go destroying a planet's ecosystem.
No, because he was supposed to be, he was into science, which was kind of an interesting, kind of an interesting clash for most Klingon culture.
Yeah.
You're talking about Captain Nudak, played by John Cothran, who's best known for Yes Man, Black Snake Moan, Rango, and Escape from New York. He has 119 credits. Looks like the Lincoln Lawyer TV series was his last credit. But he's got a lot of credits. The Last Ship was his last big role, I think, or Murder in the First. Eastbound and Down, he did 6 episodes. He will play a character in an episode of Star Trek Enterprise. He plays a different character in the video game Star Trek Borg, a different character in the video game Star Trek Klingon, and a different character in an episode of DS9. So he'll have some more Trek credits here. But I liked his... Oh, and he was in Seinfeld.
Oh, I did not follow up on it.
It's been a while since we've had one. He was in an episode called The Diplomats Club, and he's credited as Man.
Okay.
As John Cothran Jr. That's the episode where Jerry's simple airport meeting turns into a nightmare thanks to his incompetent agent.
Okay.
The Cardassians Klingons showing up, like I said, it just seems too coincidental. Like, what are they working on at that time? Are they following Galen's work and chasing him? Or are they working independently and have just stumbled on this? It just seems too disjointed. There needed to be a clear entry point. Like, maybe Galen's work was stolen and that's the mystery and they're all bidding over it. And then that would have been a reason to bring them together. But that's not the way they played it.
Yeah, it's called The Chase. So, yeah, but it's kind of a mad world or rat race or whatever you want to talk about. But one of those kind of movies where everyone's trying to get to the treasure or whatever first.
Well, it's really confusing because Galen still says he has months of work to do, but as soon as Picard makes a move on his thing, everybody's on it. And it's like, do they have spies on the Enterprise seeing that a move was made? Because otherwise, I don't understand.
Yeah.
Crusher shows her genius connecting the DNA to the 19 planets and all that stuff with the algorithm coded 4 billion years ago.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily get why they said this could be either the most profound discovery or the most dangerous. I mean, I guess you could make an argument about biological weapon and being able to break apart DNA of lots of races at once, but they don't talk about that. They just kind of it could be dangerous. It's how? What? They think it's a weapon or something?
I spent a couple seconds on that, and then the episode kept going. I was like, well, I'll come back to that. But yeah, I never got my head wrapped around that either.
And of course, Picard gets them to work together because he's a master diplomat.
Of course.
The Romulans and the Cardassians both have shown predilection to science in some ways. So I bought both of them getting involved. The Klingons were the ones that seemed a little out of left field to me. I think Vulcans would have been a better race to bring in.
Well, and we get that nice moment. I'm jumping to the end, but I've got some other stuff too. But the balance of terror moment at the end when the Romulan guy hits up Picard and he's like, hey, well, hopefully, maybe someday. And that's, it's not exactly the same as Balance of Terror when the Romulan commander says, maybe in another world, another universe or another galaxy, I might have called you friend or whatever. But I thought that was nice. And, we've talked about how not awesome the Romulans have been or interesting or whatever on TNG, but that was a nice moment that they gave them. So that I did like that.
I loved it too. What a great capper. It was the Romulans spoke very poetically, but that was the whole thing that Picard took away from that and what the aliens wanted us to take away from that.
Right.
And the Romulans do make the most sense for being the ones to have that conversation of the other races there. I don't have any complaints about that ending. That was a good capper.
I like the whole, the ruse about Ramazan or whatever, where they're like, oh, it's Ramazan. That's where we need to go to get it. And then the Cardassians disappear and like, joke's on you, suckers.
Well, because they suspected they were going to betray them, and they did betray them. And I loved how it was all set up to fake the damage and everything. And I also enjoyed the excuse to let the Klingons stay on the Enterprise and have them catch a ride. Because they're going to be an hour behind. They'll catch up to us. Well,
and that leads to a couple of funny things. It's completely predictable that when he goes into battles of strength with Data, it's completely predictable that Data's going to beat him. Still funny, though. It still made me laugh.
Well, it's also funny because the Klingon seems to celebrate Data beating him. Like, he's not upset about it. Yeah, he expects it. He sees it. He wanted to test his strength against him. He did. He lived up to the hype. But then he tries to bribe him. And that gets a little funny.
Yeah. And then I love that he walks away and Data doesn't, it makes sense. He's just right back to whatever he's doing. Not even a reaction. They're like, well, that was weird or anything like that. Just back to work. That
was the scene they could have cut to give us more of the mythology and everything. Yeah. But I'm also not complaining that they didn't cut it because I enjoyed it. It was a good moment.
Another, I'll come back to my other question. And the other thing that I thought was cool or funny or weird, Klingon biscuits come up.
I missed it.
They talk about making biscuits or a recipe for making biscuits. And the Klingon's like, well, what would I do with that? And I think there's something like that. And I was like, are there Klingon biscuits? Or actually, maybe he's the one who brings up the recipe for biscuits. And it just made me think, oh, Klingons have biscuits. So I never...
I mean, why wouldn't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Biscuits are delicious.
Maybe we talked about this, but why is Data named Data? I mean, it seems like it makes sense, but...
Because he has a lot of information. I don't know.
I guess, yeah.
And Lore is named Lore because he's the backstory. He's the story.
Right. Yeah. It makes sense from...
I'm going to spoil for you, Stephen, that we'll eventually find a third model that was an earlier version of Data and Lore. And I won't tell you anything about him other than his name is B4, like the letter B and the number 4. Yeah.
I am enjoying that very much.
Yeah. I think you'll never guess who plays him. You'll never guess. I'll give you 3 guesses. You only need 1. That's one of the films, though. That's not in the series, so we got some time.
All right. We talked about this already, but Galen ripping on them about the Starfleet mission. It made me think of when this is Apocalypse Now at the end where Marlon Brando's character is, talking about this or that, and he tells Martin Sheen's character that he's a grocery clerk trying to collect a bill, and that's what it made me think of when Galen was like, "Yeah, you're just playing it, exploring and traveling with the universe or whatever." This is I guess a Beavis and Butthead moment for me, or a 12-year-old moment, whatever. When Beverly says, I'll begin collecting DNA samples now. It just made me laugh. And then they say something else about that too, like, oh, have you found any of the DNA? It just made me laugh. Again, very immature, but
I really appreciated how sneaky Beverly was collecting the DNA while they were all fighting. Like, just letting them go. And Worf got right involved and is keeping them going. And and you notice, like, Beverly and Picard are staying as the humans. Then there's the Klingon captain and then Worf. So when they separated out at the end, Worf's with the Klingons. He's not with the Starfleet. That was an interesting choice.
It was weird to me that I didn't realize that. It took me a minute to be like, I think it was when he calls Worf his Klingon brother. And I was like, oh, yeah. It just didn't, I guess because to me, Worf is so Federation, but obviously he's Klingon. And we have Klingon stories with him. But yeah, I enjoyed that aspect of it as well.
I felt like he was just down there so you could have at least 2 of every species.
Oh, yeah.
At a certain extent, because otherwise the Klingon captain's kind of out there by himself.
Oh, and I guess that is kind of a Noah's Ark thing? While we're talking about origin.
2 of each? Yeah. And there were more than 2 Romulans, but for the most part. Let's talk about a couple of those other guest stars real quick while we're talking about it. The Romulan captain was played by Maurice Roeves, best known for Last of the Mohicans, Judge Dredd, the 2015 version of Macbeth, and The Eagle Has Landed. He has 125 credits. Yeah. This is his only Trek. No Seinfeld, sorry. Then we have the Gul Asset, and I was excited to see a Cardassian female Gul captain. Because, the Klingons, we never see female captains. We see the Duras sisters, who are players. They are not passive. Right. But Romulans, we see women captains. We don't see Cardassians. So Linda Thorson played that role. She is best known for The Avengers, the 1960s television series, Emmerdale Farm, Half Past Dead, and Olympus Force: The Key. Most recently, she's been in The Hardy Boys, which is a streaming series.
Oh, yeah.
The first episode was really good. I love. She did an episode of Schitt's Creek. And then the last guest star of note is the human progenitor. They have her listed as humanoid progenitor. Yeah. That weird alien. I thought she looked familiar. Salome Jens. Yeah. And I realized real quick, looking at her, as soon as I saw her name, who she was. But Green Lantern, Cats and Dogs, Seconds Terror of the Year 5000. What I know her from, though, is in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Yeah. She will play the female shapeshifter. Well, we meet in those species. Obviously, I told you that was coming. But for the most part, we only ever deal with this one other shapeshifter who's a female, and she is her. So she'll be in 15 episodes starting in season 2. Okay. I think the end of season 3, beginning of season 3. So seasons 3 through 7, she does 15 episodes as the female changeling. So that's really the only changeling we get to know besides Odo. She's a big player in everything that happens. And because the face is kind of half formed, it was a similar makeup job.
That's what I thought. That was the impression I got when I read that. Linda Thorson, she her character in this, I guess the blue. She has that blue in the spoon or the scoop on her face in the episode. Yeah, I guess initially the idea was that women would have that color, and the male Cardassians wouldn't, but they kind of abandoned that after this, I think, or soon after.
So, I think we see some more blues down the line, but I just assumed it was like a different region of the planet. Like, you have skin color variation in humans.
Right.
And Klingons with Discovery, we've seen lots of different tribal variations. So. But I liked it. I like to see the variation. I like to mix it up.
Yeah.
The coming together in friendship moment was cool. It was disappointing how badly some of the aliens took it.
Yeah.
Because I really liked that was the message. Like it reminds me of the song, the One Tin Soldier. I don't know if you're familiar. Listen, children, to a story. And, they fight the war to get the riches, the treasure on the hill. And it's just a message, peace on earth. Right. It's a similar reveal. I guess the writers were probably fans of that song, I would imagine. It was story by Joe Menosky and Ron D. Moore. Obviously, we've talked about Ron D. Moore a lot. We've talked about Joe Menosky, too. He was a producer and executive story editor for a long time, but previous episodes he wrote for Next Gen include Clues, First Contact, and The Nth Degree, which was a Barclay episode we really liked. So he's written some good stuff before. Yeah. He also wrote Darmok, though. So, there you go. And he's story by Time's Arrow Part 2. So, but he still has a couple more, 4 more episodes he wrote for Next Gen. So we're not done with him yet. Yeah. And then directed by Jonathan Frakes, who you may have heard of.
I did see that. Yeah.
But they dropped this, just a quick tidbit, that too much using the high warp speeds damages the engines. I want to know more.
Yeah.
How much is too much? Does this happen a lot?
I mean, whenever they got above warp 7, I feel like on TOS, Scotty was like, that's when he would be like, you can't take much more.
Well, I think there's a story coming up about what warp engines do to subspace and stuff. And I almost wonder if they just toss this line in as like, hey, we're going to deal with a story about warp speed here soon. Let's drop a little seed. Which, if that's the case, I really appreciate that.
I like dropping the breadcrumb. Yeah.
Even though I'm not entirely sure that's the case, because I think that story is more about what the engine does to space, not to the ship. But still, it's really lucky Picard solved this mystery, mostly by luck of being in the right place at the right time and everything. Because if he didn't, it seems like this mystery would have been lost to all history. Nobody else would have solved it because some of the evidence was already destroyed. So this was it. It was Picard or nobody in history solved this 4 billion-year-old puzzle.
Well, and Beverly is like comes up aces too, right? Because I feel like she's connecting the dots.
Honestly, that actually really bothered me that this mystery was so fragile that if they didn't quite hit it, it was gone.
Right. Yeah.
It shouldn't have been that fragile.
In theory, that would bump up the urgency, but it just didn't seem to.
I don't really have a lot of fashion notes, more just the blue thing, obviously. Galen's dress was super generic, like other guest characters. And then the alien design of this generic alien. I like I said, it's similar to the female shapeshifter of half form. I guess the half form was supposed to be so they could all kind of see themselves, but I really wish it had like pointed ears and Klingon forehead ridges and then like a Cardassian neck. Like seeing all that together would have helped, I think. And then a bad Romulan haircut. Yeah, that was the haircut is a choice, not a genetic. That's fair. Yeah, that's not discrimination. That was a choice they made. Joanne Linville did not have a bad haircut. She had great. And then they had 2 penises to be Klingon. No, sure, of course. Okay, let's get to ranking the episode. Keith Jackson is joining the conversation, so we might get his thoughts before we rank. Good timing. Welcome, Mr. Jackson.
Yeah, hey.
It's almost like Keith's our video correspondent in a war zone.
Yeah.
It was really, I mean, it came off as being really dry at first in a way that amused me. And it's sort of like, I was like, I couldn't believe they're getting away with this for as long as it seemed like they're getting away with it. And then this kind of appeals to me in a way, but you kind of kept like waiting for a shoe to drop. Like this still feels like they're doing a bit somehow, like taking those long moments of expressing the excitement over these little details of things, and they're establishing the importance of of course you understand how storytelling works, what they're doing and why, but it just seems like such again a dry and cerebral way to go about it. I'm looking for like artsy or something, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But it surprised me actually. I think the episode kept surprising me where the directions it was going. As far as I think I liked it a lot more than I would have expected to at the beginning. Which is, again, it's not to say that I wouldn't have if they kept doing what they were doing, but I felt like it was something that was accessible or maybe even more important than it started out to seem.
We liked the revelations at the end, but found it was relying very much on big coincidences to try to bring everything together in the timing, and that was kind of annoying. I
think my problem at the time, the contrivance of the professor insisting, because they even said, it's like he gave some options, like, well, if I had a starship, I could do blah blah blah. And it's like, why would there have been a compromise? Like, give me a ride and maybe back me up if something goes wrong, or let's wait a few days. Let's go to the conference. After this, we'll go. I can take we can go for a ride and do it. And it's just. I mean, he said it was going to be months or years to finish on his own, so that's a much more reasonable timeline. Yeah, I mean, he even said it would just take me weeks with the starship. It's like, and yet, even though he had months of work left to do, this all came together really quick, and all the aliens were right there fighting each other for the thing. That bothered me. So, I mean, it bothered you that they were on the same track? It bothered me that he said he still had months of work left to do to solve this puzzle, but all of a sudden they were all on the cusp of solving, and it came together. And were they following him? Were they doing their own independent tracks that just kind of came about at the same time? It just wasn't clear, and it felt really coincidental. They all arrived at the same planet at the same time, and all that. It just felt too far stretched. I think that's fair. I mean, I think they could have at the least made some attempt to explain how they got on the trail. Yeah. It felt like they could have come up with a better internal reason for there to be that dilemma, for them to be that insistent that it had to be that. I like the gravitas they came up with for this is why this would be such an important discovery and why it would be valuable to people and blah, 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 even though it might not have been as destructive as it turned out to be. I mean, it turned out to be a lot less destructive than they suspected, but it seemed like it could have been something. Well, let's get to ranking then. Who is your annoyance? The professor. Yeah, I almost went with him, but I love Norman Lloyd so much, I went with the alien. The humanoid progenitor? Yeah, I was just like, is this the best you can do with your message? Can't you get a little more flash, something? But I mean, that's fair. Like I said, the fact that their puzzle required Picard to solve it, or else it would have been lost forever to history if he had got it right there, right before all the clues were lost. That bothered me, but I think I'm going to go with Gola Set, because it's like, I get that you don't really like these humans, but in this instance where they're helping and you don't have the puzzle,
Just work with them. Don't betray them and do that crap.
I thought the alien progenitor, or whatever we're calling them, it was very, their message was very much like Princess Leia's message in Star Wars, the movie, before Obi-Wan Kenobi bangs R2-D2 and makes the message the full message. It felt incomplete, is what I guess I'm trying.
So you're saying if they banged her, she would have had more to say.
Right. I knew that. That wasn't going to end well.
That's a very different episode. Who do you want to have a drink with?
Your annoyance, the Kardashian commander.
You're going with Gola Osset, huh?
Yeah, I liked her style.
I'm going with Captain Nudak because he just seemed like a fun person at the bar.
He would be fun.
You and I will have a drink with. We'll do all three of us. It'll be fun.
No, I was with the Romulan at the end. I kind of it might have been a little much, but I mean that seemed.
He's just credited as Romulan captain. I didn't see a name for him, but I will give you the Romulan captain. Yeah, he is definitely going for the right causes, the right messaging, even if it's against his people's interests.
Yeah.
We are now going to rank this episode, and this is getting hard because not only are we late in the season, we had a break in the season, and we're doing DS9, so we've got more episodes jumbled in our brain. But let's start with the quality of life. I'm going lower.
Huh. I mean, it feels really too hard to remember what was going on. I feel like I liked this more than that, but I wouldn't be able to defend it just yet.
The reason I would put this above is they both opened up interesting concepts, but I feel like that one did a better job of following up on its concept than this one.
Yeah, I would go below as well.
Keith, if you're going to go up, above that's Birthright Part 1. Worf goes to the Klingons and Data's following up on his dreams. Is this better or worse than that for you?
I suppose it's worse than that.
Okay, so you'd be right about there.
Yeah, I mean, there's less going on in this. I think part of the appeal, I was caught off guard by how big the scope seemed to be becoming. I think they did a good job of building up the appearance of importance about what was happening. And,
I think that was part of my problem was they touched on the scope but didn't actually give us what the scope deserved.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. That's good. But just having the unexpected convergence of the aliens and so forth, even though for the sake of abruptness, I think they didn't give you the context you would want.
Right. Yeah.
But it still felt big, like, oh my God, we get to see these ships and this is what's happening. And oh my God, we get to see this.
Going down below that is Face of the Enemy.
Wow. I might go worse, actually.
Ha!
The quality of life in Face of the Enemy, I think I have irrational soft spots for. So
I'd go below.
Okay, we're all together then.
Yeah, we're together.
All right.
Below that's A Fistful of Datas. You might fight me, but I think that one's fun and it is ranked too low, personally. So I would go below that.
I'm above, I think. I don't know why. It just even, I mean, the concept, I can't make my mind to get to the point where I remember the details of it, and the concept immediately makes me go, I don't like that. I don't know why.
I'm going to go with you, Keith. I'm going to go above.
We'll put it above A Fistful of Datas. I would have stopped. No, below that's Birthright Part 2, and while that annoyed me with the Worf stuff, I think I would still put that above. I think it was a little more coherent, but underneath that's Lessons, where Picard falls in love, and I would definitely put it above that. So I would go a little bit lower, but not super lower.
Our season review is going to have a 10-minute conversation about the ranking.
Reordering. Well, we're getting close to the end because this was episode 20 of 26. Yeah. I think we have 6 episodes left of Next Gen this season. But next week, we're not watching Next Gen. We're going back to the space station, Deep Space Nine, for an episode called Battle Lines. After showing Bajoran spiritual leader Kai Apaka the wormhole, she, Cisco, Bashir, and Kira crash land on a moon. Kai Opaka dies, and the 3 meet the unfriendly locals.
No, that does tend to happen.
Yeah.
Until then, live long. Unlike Kai Opaka, apparently.
Because, hey, we're all the same on the inside.
And prosper by seeding yourself across the universe.
That sounded really dirty, Keith. It's All Been Done presents
Who's Got the Time?
Sounded very dirty.
It was dirty. I mean, that's what they did.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, Kake seeds himself across the universe too.
They drop their DNA samples all over the universe.
I mean, like progenitor sounds dirty.
Yes, it does.
That's what IMDb credits: humanoid progenitor,
and not the good kind of dirty. It sounds like the icky kind of dirty.
mm-hmm.